The two halves of Berlin set about rebuilding, and the dream of a true socialist state was to be realized in the GDR, symbolized by the construction of veritable palaces for the workers. Stalin Alley, this was to be called, only to be renamed after Stalin's fall from grace. The apartment blocks were actually well designed and built, but the builders weren't happy. On the 17th of June 1953, about 60 workers staged a demonstration to protest against poor pay and conditions. More and more people, including West Berliners, joined the demonstration and even set fire to a police station. The East Berlin authorities responded by appealing to the Soviet army for help. In the resulting clashes, 153 demonstrators were killed. Just a few days later, the West Berlin Senate approved the renaming of part of the East-West axis in memory of this event. The situation was now dangerous. In 1961, the unthinkable happened. The East Germans built fortifications around West Berlin, cutting it off not only from East Berlin, but from East Germany. In their propaganda, they referred to it as an anti-fascist protection wall to prevent infiltration by Western spies and terrorists. Few people believed that explanation. The construction of the wall led to some odd effects. The public transport system, obviously, was affected. One U-Bahn line was divided into two, as was the Stadtbahn. But the north-south S-Bahn tunnel and two U-Bahn lines suffered a curious fate. They mostly lay in West Berlin, but their middle sections ran through East Berlin. The stations along these sections were all closed, and West Berlin trains ran through them without stopping. These were Berlin's ghost stations. The exception was Friedrichstraße station, where two S-Bahn lines intersected with an U-Bahn line. Westerners could actually change trains here. If they had the appropriate visa, they could pass through a checkpoint and visit East Berlin for the day. The building that housed the border control point for people leaving East Berlin became known as the Palace of Tears, as so many emotional farewells took place here. Westerners had to catch the last train home before their visas ran out at midnight, while their loved ones had to stay behind. Today, it houses an exhibition on divided Berlin. There were various other crossing points, each for different categories of visitor. The best known is, of course, Checkpoint Charlie, the crossing point for diplomats and foreigners. The wall was more than just a wall. To really appreciate the scale of the thing, you have to visit the memorial on Bernauer Straße. Here, West Berlin is on the right. The metal poles mark where the familiar wall itself was. Most of this strip was filled with defense systems of all kinds, watchtowers, floodlights, and a second wall to keep East Berliners well away. This was the deadly no man's land. These markings show where people dug tunnels to escape to the west. These, buildings that were demolished to make way for the installations. On this spot, the Church of the Reconciliation stood. Originally, it was allowed to remain standing and the spire was used as a watchtower, but it was finally demolished in 1985. Today, a modern chapel has been built. 4 days a week, a 15-minute meditation is held, at which the biography of one of the people who died trying to cross the wall is read out. The wall was actually built entirely on East German land, usually a metre or so from the actual border, sometimes more, and this could be deadly. At this spot, near the Oberbaum Bridge, although the physical wall was built on the far bank, the entire river was East Berlin territory. In separate incidents, 5 West Berlin children drowned after falling in the river, and anyone diving in to rescue them would have been shot. This, by the way, is the famous East Side Gallery, a segment of the wall that is now an open-air art gallery. Berlin and the world had to get used to living with the world's deadliest border running straight through the middle. West Berlin's mayor had to move to the Schöneberg town hall, and it was on this balcony that John F. Kennedy lifted West Berliners' spirits with a now famous speech.
Today, in the world of freedom, the proudest boast is, Ich bin ein Berliner.
This speech probably ranks among the greatest ever made, and succeeded in reassuring West Berliners that the Western world would never abandon them. Kennedy's assassination just a few months later shocked West Berliners almost as much as it did Americans.
It starts with an itch and a tingle, and then it builds and expands. And suddenly all at once
East Berlin, centered around Alexanderplatz, continued with its program of urban redevelopment. The results were not always beautiful, but in fact, if you managed to stay out of trouble, life in this part of the city could be quite agreeable. Not luxurious, but comfortable.
There's something that lives inside me. I promise I never let it out.
The recently opened DDR Museum showcases life in the socialist state, and its restaurant offers a selection of typical dishes.
It's making a home.
West Berlin, with the zoo its new centre, suffered a bit. A walled-in half-city is not easy to sell as a nice place to live. Formerly upmarket inner-city areas like Kreuzberg found themselves hard up against the wall, and people moved out. But there were always people to replace them, and the area became a haven for students, artists, university dropouts, and people seeking an alternative lifestyle. Aided by West Berlin's policies aimed at encouraging anyone at all to live there, Kreuzberg became decidedly bohemian. SO36 was its pre-war postal code, but is also the name of a famous nightclub, one of many in Berlin that pioneered new forms of music, punk, new wave, techno.
I promise I never let it end. It grows and divides inside me.
West Berlin also attracted immigrants, mostly from Turkey, brought in to make up for an acute labour shortage. So many of them settled around the Cottbusser Tor area that it became known as Little Istanbul, and the U-Bahn line as the Orient Express. With most of the important cultural venues beyond the wall in East Berlin, the West had to build some of its own. And so, surrounding St. Matthew's Church, the Culture Forum was built. The new National Gallery, based on a design originally for a sugar factory. The State Library, which took more than 10 years to build. The Philharmonia, the Chamber Music Hall, the Portrait Gallery, the Museum of Prints and Drawings, the Museum of Arts and Crafts, and the Museum of Musical Instruments. A short distance away, the Congress Hall, now the House of World Cultures, was built in what at the time was, for Germany, a strikingly new form, and immediately became known as the Pregnant Oyster. It partially collapsed in 1980, but contrary to a popular myth, this didn't supply a local band with its name, Einstürzende Neubauten, meaning collapsing new buildings. The band had already settled on that name. It was simply a coincidence. Thanks to the incorporation in 1920 of so many cities and towns, Berlin has large areas of lake and forest inside its official border. This meant that when Berlin was divided, West Berliners could still go for walks in the country, and there was even an artificial bathing beach. At the extreme southwest corner of the city, a bus takes you through the forest to the Glienicke Bridge, right on the border. The other side of the bridge was the East German city of Potsdam. This is the famous Bridge of Spies, where, during the Cold War, a number of spy swaps took place. All in all, the situation was bad, but not impossible. The wall eventually came down in 1989, but by mistake.